The rookie smirked as he approached the old man at the shooting range. "Come on, old-timer, bet you can't hit the target from here." Private Jackson had just posted the best score of his training class and was feeling invincible. The old man didn't say a word. He just stepped up to the firing line, picked up the rifle with hands that moved like they'd done this a million times before, and settled into a shooting stance that made every instructor on the range suddenly pay attention. No warm-up, no practice shots, no trash talk, just one perfect shot after another, hitting targets Jackson couldn't even see clearly. Because sometimes legends don't announce themselves. They just show up and remind everyone what excellence really looks like. When it was over, no one clapped. No one dared. Because in that moment, every recruit, and even the instructors, understood what they'd just witnessed. This wasn't luck. This wasn't even skill. It was mastery born of something deeper. And Jackson? He'd just been given a lesson not found in manuals. Legends don't boast. They show up, they execute, and they leave nothing but silence in their wake. Welcome to Silent Salute, where we discover that wisdom often comes disguised as humility. Before we continue this incredible story, tell us in the comments from which city in the world are you watching this video today. And if you believe that the greatest teachers are often the ones who never claim to be teaching, hit that subscribe button to support our channel. We're honored to share these remarkable stories with you. The Marine Corps recruit training facility at Parris Island had been producing elite warriors for over a century, but the marksmanship range was where recruits truly began to understand what it meant to be a Marine. Here, surrounded by the smell of gunpowder and the crack of rifle fire, young Americans learned the precision and discipline that would define their military careers. Private First Class Tony Jackson was having the best day of his 13-week journey from civilian to Marine. After weeks of struggling with rifle fundamentals, something had clicked during that morning's live fire exercise. His shooting scores had improved dramatically, and he'd posted the highest marksmanship score in his training platoon. Jackson's success had generated praise from drill instructors who rarely offered encouragement and admiration from fellow recruits who'd been watching him struggle with basic shooting skills just days earlier. For the first time since arriving at Parris Island, Jackson felt like he truly belonged among the elite warriors he aspired to become. At 22 years old, Jackson had enlisted in the Marines after completing 2 years of college on a shooting scholarship. His collegiate marksmanship experience had given him confidence with rifles that most recruits lacked, and he'd expected to excel in military shooting from the beginning of his training. But Marine Corps marksmanship requirements were different from civilian competitive shooting. The precision, speed, and adaptability demanded by military standards had initially overwhelmed Jackson's technical skills and shattered his confidence in abilities he'd considered exceptional. The breakthrough had come during intensive practice sessions where Jackson had finally integrated civilian shooting fundamentals with military tactical requirements. His natural talent, combined with proper instruction and relentless practice, had produced the kind of marksmanship capability that characterized elite Marines. Jackson's dramatic improvement had made him somewhat cocky about his newfound abilities. He'd gone from struggling recruit to top shooter in his platoon, and the rapid transformation had given him confidence that bordered on arrogance about his marksmanship skills. Among the civilian personnel who supported training operations at the rifle range was an elderly man known simply as Ray. For 8 years, Ray had worked as a range maintenance specialist, responsible for setting up targets, maintaining equipment, and ensuring that shooting facilities operated safely and efficiently. Ray appeared to be in his 70s, with gray hair, weathered hands, and the kind of quiet competence that characterized experienced support personnel. He moved around the range with purposeful efficiency, setting up training scenarios and maintaining equipment with attention to detail that impressed drill instructors who demanded perfection in all aspects of recruit training. To the thousands of recruits who'd trained on Ray's range over the years, he was practically invisible, just another civilian employee who worked in the background while real Marines focused on the serious business of learning to fight. Most recruits assumed he was a local hire with no particular military background, employed for his reliability rather than any special expertise. What they didn't know was that Ray's full name was Raymond "Deadeye" Martinez, and before becoming a maintenance worker, he'd been one of the most legendary snipers in Marine Corps history. His service record included multiple combat deployments, 94 confirmed kills, and marksmanship achievements that had established records that stood for decades. Ray had deliberately chosen anonymity when he'd taken the maintenance job 8 years earlier. After retiring from active duty, he'd worked briefly as a civilian marksmanship instructor, but constantly discussing his combat experiences had proven psychologically difficult for someone who preferred to leave those memories undisturbed. The range maintenance position had seemed perfect for Ray's needs. It allowed him to remain connected to the Marine Corps shooting community he understood and respected, while providing honest work that didn't require him to relive traumatic aspects of his military service. But watching young Marines struggle with shooting fundamentals that he'd mastered decades earlier had become increasingly frustrating for Ray. Not because he disagreed with current instruction methods, the training was excellent, but because he could see simple corrections that would immediately improve recruits' performance. Jackson's recent marksmanship success had caught Ray's attention, not because it was exceptional by historical standards, but because Jackson's attitude suggested he thought his abilities were better than they actually were. Ray had observed thousands of recruits during his 8 years at the range, and he recognized the signs of overconfidence that often preceded embarrassing failures. After Jackson's record-setting performance that morning, he'd spent his free time at the range, showing off his improved shooting skills to other recruits and making comments about his natural talent that revealed his lack of understanding about what true marksmanship excellence looked like. "I've always been a natural shooter," Jackson told his platoon mates while demonstrating his rifle handling techniques. "Some people just have the gift for precision shooting." Ray was working nearby, adjusting target mechanisms while listening to Jackson's boastful commentary about his marksmanship abilities. The young Marine's confidence wasn't entirely misplaced. His scores were genuinely impressive for a recruit, but his assumption that scoring well on basic military shooting qualified him as an expert marksman revealed his inexperience. "The secret to good shooting is natural talent," Jackson continued lecturing his fellow recruits. "You either have the eye for it or you don't. All the training in the world can't make up for natural ability." Ray's expression showed mild amusement at Jackson's oversimplified understanding of marksmanship development. In Ray's experience, natural talent was less important than proper training, consistent practice, and the mental discipline to perform under pressure. Jackson's impromptu instruction session was interrupted when drill instructor Staff Sergeant Williams approached the group to observe their off-duty shooting practice. Williams had been impressed by Jackson's morning performance, but wanted to ensure that his success was based on solid fundamentals rather than temporary good luck. "Jackson," Williams said with the neutral tone that drill instructors used when evaluating recruit performance, "show me your shooting position and sight alignment." Jackson eagerly demonstrated the techniques that had produced his record scores, explaining his methods with the confidence of someone who believed he'd mastered the complexities of precision shooting. Williams watched Jackson's demonstration with professional interest, noting both the strengths and weaknesses in his approach. "Jackson, your fundamentals are solid, but your confidence might be getting ahead of your actual capabilities." Jackson's response revealed the extent of his overconfidence. "Staff Sergeant, I'm shooting better than anyone else in the platoon. I think I've got a pretty good handle on what it takes to be an expert marksman." Williams recognized the attitude that often preceded humbling experiences for overconfident recruits. "Jackson, scoring well on basic recruit shooting doesn't make you an expert. There are levels of marksmanship capability that you haven't even begun to understand." Jackson's competitive nature led him to challenge Williams' assessment. "Staff Sergeant, what would I need to do to prove that my shooting ability is genuinely exceptional?" Williams glanced toward Ray, who was working on target equipment within earshot of their conversation. An idea formed that would provide Jackson with valuable perspective on his actual skill level compared to true marksmanship excellence. "Jackson, if you think your shooting ability is exceptional, perhaps you'd like to demonstrate it in comparison to someone with different experience." Jackson immediately agreed. "Staff Sergeant, I'm willing to compete against anyone you think would provide a fair comparison." Williams looked directly at Ray, who had been listening to the conversation while continuing his maintenance work. "Ray, would you be willing to participate in a shooting demonstration with Private Jackson?" Ray paused in his work, understanding that Williams was creating an opportunity to provide Jackson with education about the difference between good shooting and exceptional marksmanship. "Staff Sergeant," Ray said quietly, "I'm not sure that would be fair to the young Marine." Jackson interpreted Ray's reluctance as evidence that the old maintenance worker was intimidated by his shooting ability. "Come on, old-timer. I'll take it easy on you." Ray's expression showed mild amusement at Jackson's assumption that age and civilian employment indicated inferior shooting capability. "Son, are you sure you want to make this competition?" Jackson's confidence made him dismissive of any challenge Ray might present. "Old man, I just posted the best shooting score in my training platoon. I think I can handle whatever you've got." Ray looked at Williams, who nodded encouragement for the demonstration that would provide Jackson with valuable perspective on his actual skill level. "All right," Ray said simply. "Let's see what you can do." Williams set up the shooting competition with parameters that would challenge both participants while providing educational value for the recruits who gathered to observe the contest between their top shooter and the elderly maintenance worker. "The competition will consist of 3 stages," Williams announced to the growing crowd of recruits. "First, precision shooting at known distances. Second, rapid-fire engagement of multiple targets. Third, long-range shooting at maximum effective range for the rifle system." Jackson was confident about all 3 stages, believing that his recent improvements and natural talent would easily overcome any advantages Ray might have from years of experience with range maintenance. "Each stage will be scored independently," Williams continued, "with overall winner determined by cumulative performance across all 3 challenges." Ray listened to the competition parameters while making mental adjustments to his approach. He hadn't fired a rifle competitively in several years, but the fundamentals of precision shooting were permanently ingrained in his muscle memory and tactical thinking. Jackson began his preparation with the kind of detailed routine he'd developed during his collegiate shooting career. He checked his rifle carefully, adjusted his shooting position multiple times, and spent several minutes studying environmental conditions that might affect bullet trajectory. Ray's preparation was notably different. He picked up the rifle, conducted a brief safety inspection, and settled into shooting position with the casual efficiency of someone who'd performed these actions thousands of times before. "Jackson, you may begin the precision shooting stage when ready," Williams announced. Jackson approached the first stage with the methodical technique that had produced his record scores. He fired slowly and deliberately, taking time between shots to ensure perfect sight alignment and trigger control. His performance was genuinely impressive by recruit standards. 5 shots at 200 yards produced a tight grouping that demonstrated solid fundamentals and consistent technique. "Jackson, excellent shooting," Williams confirmed after examining the target. 4 shots in the X-ring, 1 shot in the 9 ring. That's expert-level marksmanship. Jackson was pleased with his performance, confident that he'd established a standard that Ray would struggle to match. "Ray, you're up for the precision stage," Williams announced. Ray approached the firing line with none of Jackson's elaborate preparation routine. He assumed shooting position, acquired sight picture, and began firing with a rhythm that seemed almost casual compared to Jackson's careful deliberation. But Ray's shots were faster than Jackson's, and each one struck the target with precision that seemed impossible given his relaxed approach to the shooting process. When Ray completed his 5 shots, Williams examined the target with an expression that mixed amazement with professional admiration. "Ray, 5 shots, all X-ring," Williams announced to the stunned audience. "Perfect score." Jackson stared at Ray's target, trying to understand how the old maintenance worker had achieved perfect accuracy while appearing to put forth minimal effort. "That's got to be luck," Jackson muttered to his fellow recruits. "Nobody shoots that well without really concentrating on each shot." But Ray's performance in the second stage would prove that his precision wasn't accidental. The rapid-fire stage required engaging 5 targets at varying distances within a 30-second time limit. Success demanded not just marksmanship accuracy but speed, target acquisition, and the ability to transition between firing positions quickly. Jackson approached the rapid-fire challenge with the same methodical technique he'd used for precision shooting, but the time constraints forced him to compromise his careful preparation routine. His performance was respectable but not exceptional. 4 hits out of 5 targets, with times that met minimum standards but didn't demonstrate exceptional capability. "Jackson, solid performance under time pressure," Williams assessed. "You maintained reasonable accuracy while adapting to rapid engagement requirements." Ray's approach to the rapid-fire stage was completely different from his casual precision shooting. His movements became fluid and economical, transitioning between targets with the kind of tactical efficiency that characterized combat-trained marksmen. His shooting rhythm was faster than Jackson's, but each shot was delivered with the same precision he'd demonstrated during the deliberate fire stage. More impressively, his target transitions were seamless, suggesting extensive experience with multiple target engagement. Ray completed the rapid-fire stage with 5 perfect hits in less than 20 seconds, demonstrating capabilities that exceeded anything Jackson had imagined possible. Ray, perfect score in record time, Williams announced, his voice carrying respect that hadn't been present when he'd introduced the competition. Jackson was beginning to understand that Ray's shooting ability was far superior to his own, but he maintained hope that the long-range stage would allow his technical knowledge and equipment familiarity to overcome Ray's apparent experience advantages. The long-range stage was conducted at 500 yards, the maximum effective range for the rifle system they were using. Success required understanding of ballistics, environmental compensation, and the mental discipline to maintain accuracy at distances where minor errors resulted in complete misses. Jackson spent considerable time calculating wind speed, temperature effects, and bullet trajectory before beginning his long-range shooting. His technical approach was methodical and based on principles he'd learned during civilian competitive shooting. His performance at 500 yards was adequate, but not exceptional. 3 hits out of 5 shots, with grouping that demonstrated reasonable understanding of long-range shooting principles, but limited practical experience with extreme distance marksmanship. Jackson, acceptable performance at extended range, Williams assessed. Your technical knowledge is sound, but long-range shooting requires experience that can't be gained quickly. Ray's preparation for the long-range stage was notably different from Jackson's calculation-heavy approach. He spent time observing environmental conditions, but his assessment appeared to be intuitive rather than mathematical. When Ray began shooting at 500 yards, his technique seemed unchanged from his performance at shorter distances. The same casual confidence, the same economical movements, the same precision that had characterized his earlier shooting. But Ray's long-range performance would demonstrate capabilities that seemed impossible given the equipment limitations and environmental challenges. 5 shots at 500 yards, all hitting the target center with grouping that suggested he was shooting at much shorter distances. His accuracy was so consistent that Williams checked the target multiple times to ensure there hadn't been some mistake in scoring. Ray, perfect score at 500 yards, Williams announced with obvious amazement. That's some of the finest long-range shooting I've ever witnessed. Jackson was completely demoralized by Ray's performance, understanding that he'd been outclassed in every aspect of marksmanship by someone he'd dismissed as an aging maintenance worker. How is that possible? Jackson asked Williams. I've been training for months, and I've never seen shooting like that. Williams looked at Ray, who was cleaning the rifle with the same methodical efficiency he brought to all his tasks. Jackson, I think you should ask Ray about his background. You might learn something about what real marksmanship expertise looks like. Jackson approached Ray with the humility that came from being thoroughly outclassed in an area where he'd considered himself exceptional. Sir, Jackson said respectfully, I have to ask, where did you learn to shoot like that? Ray's answer would reveal the depth of experience that his maintenance job had concealed for 8 years. Son, I learned to shoot in places where missing the target meant people died. That kind of motivation tends to improve your accuracy pretty quickly. Jackson was beginning to understand that Ray's shooting ability wasn't the result of recreational marksmanship, but something much more serious and professional. Sir, were you military? Ray nodded slowly. 26 years, Marines. Did some shooting along the way. Jackson realized he was talking to someone whose military experience far exceeded anything he'd encountered during his recruit training. What kind of shooting, sir? Ray's answer would transform Jackson's understanding of what marksmanship excellence really meant. Special operations. Precision shooting in combat conditions where you don't get second chances. Williams had been listening to the conversation, and he decided it was time to provide Jackson and the other recruits with complete context for what they'd witnessed. Jackson, Ray is being modest about his background. His full name is Raymond Martinez, and he's one of the most decorated snipers in Marine Corps history. Jackson felt like he'd been hit by lightning. Sir, you're a Marine sniper? Ray's response revealed the complexity of his relationship with his military service and its recognition. I was a Marine sniper. Now I'm a maintenance worker who helps train the next generation of Marines. Williams continued providing context that would help Jackson understand the significance of what he'd experienced. Ray served multiple combat deployments and achieved marksmanship results that are still studied in sniper schools. His techniques have been incorporated into current training methods. Jackson was struggling to process the implications of having challenged someone whose expertise exceeded anything he'd imagined possible. "Sir, why didn't you tell me about your background before we started shooting?" Ray's answer reflected his understanding of how learning and humility work together. "Son, would you have learned anything if I'd started by telling you I was a legendary sniper?" Sometimes the best lessons come from discovering your limitations through experience rather than being told about them. Jackson realized that Ray's willingness to participate in the shooting competition hadn't been about demonstrating his superiority. It had been about providing education that Jackson couldn't have received any other way. "What should I have learned from this experience?" Jackson asked. Ray's response provided the educational foundation that Williams had hoped the competition would create. First, that confidence should be based on actual capability rather than limited comparison. You're shooting better than other recruits, but recruit-level shooting isn't the highest standard that exists. Ray continued his instruction, using Jackson's experience as the foundation for broader lessons about marksmanship development. Second, that real marksmanship expertise takes years to develop and requires experience under conditions that test your abilities in ways that can't be replicated in training. Jackson was taking mental notes, understanding that he was receiving instruction from someone whose expertise had been proven under the most demanding conditions possible. Third, that the fundamentals you're learning now are just the beginning of what's possible if you continue developing your skills with proper dedication and instruction. Ray's approach to instruction was gentle but direct, providing Jackson with perspective that would guide his continued development as a marksman. "Sir, what would you recommend for someone who wants to develop real marksmanship expertise?" Ray's answer reflected decades of experience developing marksmen under conditions where lives depended on accurate shooting. First, master the fundamentals until they become automatic. Everything else builds on breathing, sight alignment, trigger control, and follow through. If those aren't perfect every time, advanced techniques won't help you. Ray continued his instruction, drawing on knowledge that had been developed through combat experience rather than academic study. Second, learn to shoot under stress. Range shooting in perfect conditions doesn't prepare you for situations where your heart rate is elevated, your hands are shaking, and you have limited time to engage targets. Jackson was beginning to understand that the controlled environment of recruit training represented only the beginning of what real marksmanship demanded. Third, understand that precision shooting is more mental than physical. The mechanics of shooting can be learned relatively quickly, but the mental discipline to perform consistently under pressure takes years to develop. Ray's instruction was providing Jackson with a framework for understanding his own development as a marksman and the work that lay ahead if he wanted to achieve genuine expertise. "Sir, how long does it take to develop the kind of shooting ability you demonstrated today?" Ray's answer was honest about the time and dedication required for exceptional marksmanship. "Jackson, I spent 8 years in combat operations where precision shooting was a daily requirement. I fired thousands of rounds under conditions that tested every aspect of my technique and mental preparation." Ray continued explaining the development process that had produced his legendary capabilities. "The shooting you saw today represents muscle memory and tactical thinking that were developed through experiences you can't replicate in training. Combat shooting teaches lessons that can't be learned any other way." Jackson was processing the implications of learning that Ray's expertise had been developed through experiences that he hoped never to encounter himself. "But sir, how can Marines develop those capabilities without combat experience?" Ray's response provided practical guidance for developing marksmanship skills within the constraints of peacetime training. Through progressive training that gradually increases stress and complexity. Start with perfect fundamentals under ideal conditions. Then systematically add challenges that test your ability to maintain accuracy when everything isn't perfect. Ray explained specific training methods that could simulate some aspects of the stress and uncertainty that characterize combat shooting. Shoot while fatigued, shoot with time pressure, shoot at unknown distances, shoot in poor weather conditions. Each challenge tests different aspects of your marksmanship capability. Williams was taking notes on Ray's instruction, recognizing that the educational value of this conversation extended far beyond Jackson's personal development. Ray, would you be willing to share these training methods with our instructors? Your approach to marksmanship development could enhance our entire training program. Ray considered Williams' request, understanding that his knowledge could benefit many Marines if it were properly integrated into formal training curricula. Staff Sergeant, I've been watching recruit marksmanship training for 8 years. I've seen areas where improvements could be made without changing the fundamental structure of your program. Williams was immediately interested. What kind of improvements? Ray's answer reflected his understanding of both current training methods and the additional capabilities that combat experience had taught him were necessary. Current training does an excellent job teaching basic rifle skills, but it could be enhanced by including more stress inoculation and environmental challenges that prepare Marines for shooting under less than ideal conditions. Ray continued outlining specific improvements that could enhance the effectiveness of recruit marksmanship training. For example, including shooting exercises that require rapid position changes, target engagement while wearing full combat equipment, and precision shooting after physical exertion that elevates heart rate and affects motor control. Jackson was beginning to understand that his record-setting shooting performance that morning represented proficiency in only the most basic aspects of what military marksmanship actually required. Sir, are you saying that my shooting ability today wouldn't be adequate for combat conditions? Ray's response was honest but encouraging about Jackson's potential for continued development. Jackson, your shooting ability today demonstrates that you have the foundation for developing genuine marksmanship expertise. But foundation isn't the same as completion. Ray used Jackson's experience as an example of how marksmanship development progressed from basic competence to operational capability. The accuracy you demonstrated is adequate for engaging targets under ideal conditions. Combat shooting requires maintaining that accuracy when conditions are far from ideal. Ray explained the additional challenges that separated training marksmanship from operational effectiveness. Combat shooting might require engaging targets at unknown distances, in poor lighting, while under enemy fire after hours of physical exertion, and with equipment that isn't perfectly zeroed. Jackson was gaining new appreciation for the complexity of real-world marksmanship and the limitations of his current abilities. How do Marines prepare for those kinds of challenges? Ray's answer outlined a development path that could transform basic shooting skills into combat-ready capabilities. Through progressive training that systematically introduces each challenge until you can maintain accuracy regardless of external conditions. Ray continued explaining the mental aspects of marksmanship development that were often overlooked in basic training. More importantly, through developing the mental discipline to focus on fundamentals when everything around you is chaotic and stressful. Williams asked the question that would determine whether Ray's expertise could be formally integrated into recruit training. Ray, would you be willing to work with our training staff to develop enhanced marksmanship instruction that incorporates these methods? Ray's answer reflected his desire to contribute to Marine training while maintaining boundaries around his combat experiences. Staff Sergeant, I'd be honored to help improve marksmanship training, but I want to focus on teaching techniques rather than discussing the combat experiences where they were developed. Williams understood Ray's preference for emphasizing technical instruction over personal war stories. Ray, we're interested in your training methods, not your operational history. Your technical knowledge is what would benefit our recruits. Ray agreed to expand his role from maintenance worker to marksmanship instructor, understanding that his expertise could significantly enhance recruit training while allowing him to remain connected to the Marine Corps community he respected. I'll work with your staff to develop training scenarios that challenge recruits without overwhelming them. The goal is to build confidence while teaching realistic capabilities. Jackson raised his hand to ask a question that reflected his new understanding of marksmanship development. Sir, what would you recommend for my continued development as a marksman? Ray's advice was specific and practical, based on his assessment of Jackson's current abilities and potential for improvement. First, continue perfecting your fundamentals until they're automatic under any conditions. Second, seek out training opportunities that challenge your ability to maintain accuracy under stress. Third, Remain humble about your abilities while staying confident in your potential. Ray's final piece of advice addressed the attitude problem that had led to Jackson's humbling experience. Remember that marksmanship is a skill that can always be improved. The moment you think you've mastered it completely is the moment you stop growing as a marksman. Jackson's experience had transformed his understanding of his own abilities and his approach to continued development. Sir, thank you for the lesson. I understand now that I have a lot more to learn. Ray's response reflected his satisfaction with the educational outcome of the shooting competition. Jackson, recognizing that you have more to learn is the first step toward actually learning it. Keep that attitude, and you'll develop into an excellent marksman. Williams concluded the impromptu training session by summarizing the lessons that all the recruits could take from Jackson's experience. Gentlemen, what you've witnessed today demonstrates the difference between basic competence and genuine expertise. Use this example to guide your own development and maintain appropriate humility about your current abilities. Ray's transition from anonymous maintenance worker to recognized marksmanship expert led to significant improvements in recruit training that enhanced the shooting capabilities of thousands of Marines. His methods for progressive skill development and stress inoculation became standard components of marksmanship instruction throughout Marine Corps training. Jackson's humbling experience became a catalyst for genuine improvement rather than a source of discouragement. Understanding the difference between his current abilities and true marksmanship expertise motivated him to approach continued training with dedication and appropriate humility. Ray worked with training staff to develop enhanced marksmanship curricula that incorporated realistic challenges without overwhelming recruits who were still mastering basic fundamentals. His approach balanced building confidence with teaching realistic expectations about combat shooting requirements. The shooting competition that had begun as Jackson's overconfident challenge became legendary within recruit training, used as an example of how assumptions about capability could be dangerously wrong and how genuine expertise often came from unexpected sources. Jackson completed recruit training with enhanced marksmanship skills and a fundamentally different understanding of what constituted real shooting excellence. His experience with Ray had taught him that confidence should be based on capability rather than comparison to others with limited experience. Years later, as a staff NCO responsible for training new Marines, Jackson would use his experience with Ray as an example of how humility and continued learning were essential for genuine professional development. His story became part of training folklore that reminded Marines to remain open to instruction regardless of their current skill level. Ray's formal integration into marksmanship training provided recruit instructors with access to techniques and perspectives that had been developed under combat conditions. His methods enhanced training effectiveness while preserving the institutional knowledge that might otherwise have been lost when combat veterans retired without sharing their expertise. The range where Jackson had challenged Ray became a symbol of how learning opportunities could emerge from unexpected encounters. Recruits were regularly reminded that expertise could be found in many places and that recognizing it required humility and attention to details that might not be immediately obvious. Ray's influence extended beyond marksmanship technique to broader lessons about professional development and the relationship between confidence and competence. His example demonstrated that true expertise was characterized by quiet confidence rather than boastful claims about ability. Jackson's collegiate shooting background, which had initially made him overconfident about his military marksmanship potential, eventually became an asset when properly directed by Ray's instruction. His natural talent, combined with appropriate humility and proper training, developed into genuine expertise that served him throughout his Marine Corps career. Ray's willingness to participate in Jackson's challenge demonstrated how effective teachers sometimes provided education through experience rather than lecture. The shooting competition had taught lessons about capability, humility, and continued learning that couldn't have been communicated through conventional instruction methods. The transformation of both Jackson's attitude and Ray's role illustrated how individual encounters could have institutional impact when they involved people willing to learn and teach. Jackson's humbling experience became Ray's opportunity to contribute his expertise to Marine training in ways that benefited countless future Marines. Ray's methods for developing marksmanship under stress became models for military training programs throughout the Department of Defense. His approach to progressive skill development was adopted by Army, Navy, and Air Force marksmanship programs that recognize the value of techniques proven under combat conditions. Jackson's story became part of Marine Corps education about the importance of maintaining appropriate humility about personal capabilities while remaining confident in potential for continued improvement. His experience demonstrated that the most effective learning often came from encounters that challenged comfortable assumptions about ability. Ray's legacy lived on in the enhanced marksmanship capabilities of Marines who benefited from training methods he developed through combat experience. His techniques saved lives in subsequent conflicts where Marines faced shooting challenges that required capabilities beyond basic range marksmanship. The quiet maintenance worker who had seemed unremarkable to thousands of recruits proved to be one of the most valuable training assets in Marine Corps history. His transformation from anonymous support personnel to acknowledged expert demonstrated that the most important capabilities often resided in unexpected places. Ray's story became part of military education about the importance of recognizing and utilizing expertise wherever it could be found. His example reminded military leaders that their most valuable resources were often people whose backgrounds weren't immediately apparent. Jackson's challenge, motivated by overconfidence about his shooting ability, ultimately led to improvements in Marine Corps training that enhanced the combat effectiveness of thousands of Marines. His willingness to learn from his humbling experience created benefits that extended far beyond his personal development. The shooting range where a rookie had challenged a legend became a place where recruits learned not just marksmanship fundamentals, but broader lessons about humility, continued learning, and the recognition that excellence often came from unexpected sources. Years later, when Ray finally retired from his training duties, he carried with him the satisfaction of having transformed a moment of individual education into institutional improvement that would benefit Marine Corps capabilities for generations. His legacy lived on in the marksmanship skills of Marines who would never know his name, but whose lives might depend on techniques he developed under combat conditions decades earlier. Jackson's transformation from overconfident recruit to humble student illustrated how individual encounters with exceptional people could change not just personal development, but professional trajectory. His experience with Ray shaped his approach to leadership and continued learning throughout his military career. The lesson of Jackson's challenge was that the most valuable teachers were often those who demonstrated excellence rather than claimed it, and that the most important learning experiences were often those that challenged comfortable assumptions about personal capability and potential. This story was brought to you by Silent Salute. Before we leave you today, here's our question. Have you ever had your assumptions about your own abilities challenged by someone whose expertise you didn't recognize until it was too late to take back your overconfident words? Someone whose quiet competence humbled you in ways that ultimately made you better at what you do? Tell us in the comments about the hidden experts who've taught you important lessons about capability and humility. And if you believe that the greatest teachers are often those who let their skills speak louder than their words, hit that subscribe button to support our channel. Every story reminds us that expertise often comes disguised as humility, and that the most valuable lessons are often learned when we discover that we have much more to learn than we realized. We'll see you in the next one.